I think is important to mention and to welcome in particular. Of course, we've got our keynote. I know her as minister. She was my minister when she was still with Dr. Naledi Pandor. We have with us the MISTRA Council of Advisors, Board of Governors, Management and Staff, the University of Johannesburg. There are representatives here for the partnership with MISTRA, and they partner with us in terms of this annual lecture. MISTRA partners and funders. We also have people from the diplomatic corps and a few ambassadors. Your Excellencies, welcome. Dave Lewis, I saw you. He has really been a South African setting the example in the long fight against corruption in our country. Kai Ngema, who has held several posts in the telecommunications sector. Lebogang Mulaisi of the Presidential Climate Commission, ex-COSATU, also brings a wealth of research experience on just transition issues. And if I mention your name, except for my good minister, we're going to expect questions from you. Lawson Naidu of the Council for the Advancement of South Africa's Constitution and many other roles. Siri, who's interrupting me. Martin Kingston of Business for South Africa, BASA. And I believe JJ Tabane is also with us. My name is Claudel Finnick. I sit on the MISTRA board, and I am going to direct the program for you today. Is that okay? Yes. Thank you. Got your permission, which basically means I can do anything with you now. You are in my hands. For those of you both in the room and for those of you online, we are streaming live. We are on YouTube. But also, if you want to let the world out there know what we're talking about, you're more than welcome. Go to the LinkedIn page of MISTRA, the Facebook page, also X handle at MISTRA_SA. And use our hashtag please so that we can see what exactly is going on. It would also help us to take some of what you bring into the conversation to the rest. And if you've got your pen with you, it is MISTRA UJ Lecture. So MISTRA UJ, capital letters, lecture, capital letter, but the rest of the word lowered. So it is hashtag MISTRA UJ Lecture. Right, just some housekeeping stuff before I introduce our speaker. If you could please remember to put your phone on silent. Let's be respectful to the room and in particular whoever's on the stage. If you haven't yet discovered the bathroom, if you go out, you don't turn left, and you'll just go towards where you have the refreshments, and you'll see the bathroom on your right-hand side. If there's smokers in the room and the conversation is becoming too hot and heated for you, and you feel like you need to really do something, and it's really become a problem for you, please go out all the way you came in the lift. When you get to the lift, you're not going to press ground. You'll see there is an F. You press F, it's flight mode. It's going to take you to the roof. There's a helicopter waiting for you to take you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce the speaker who is going to do the welcome for us, Prof. Paswana Mafuya. She's the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation at the University of Johannesburg. So Prof, when I read your bio, I got confused. And I've got a doctorate. I was like, I don't know this woman. It's like, epidemiology, what? Epidemiology. So I'm not going to But the agreement that I've had is that we're not going to read all of the bios, and you're all familiar with the speakers in terms of this in your pack. So I really just want to highlight the fact that now I was going to say it right, and because I deliberately said it wrong a few times, now it's wrong in my head. So you are going to repeat it when you come here and tell them what exactly it is that you do. But we are really fortunate to have you with us. She's very, very accomplished. When I looked at the bio, it's not just work here in South Africa, it's work in Ghana, work on the continent, working internationally. We are very, very honored to have you with us. So if I can invite you to please come on stage and welcome the audience for us.
Thank you, Program Director. To our distinguished keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Naledi Pandor, Chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation Board, former Minister Deco, former Minister Higher Education, my former Minister Science and Technology multiple times, Honorable Deputy Minister Andrew Snell, Deco, and other government officials. I hope I called it right. Council, senior leaders and staff of the University of Johannesburg, Ministerial Council of Advisors, Board of Governors, management and staff, the diplomatic corps, and especially their excellencies, the ambassadors of Brazil, Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Thailand, Zimbabwe, United Arab Emirates, Ecuador, corporate stakeholders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and all of those who have joined us online. Royal Dumedisha, Huyenan Sanbonani, good evening, Tobel. On behalf of the great University of Johannesburg Council and its management and the Vice Chancellor, Professor Lesokwa George Mbedi, it is my great honor to welcome you all to this year's Mapungubwe annual lecture, hosted in partnership with the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, MISTRA. Since its inception in 2012, this flagship lecture has become a distinguished platform in South Africa's intellectual and policy discourse, bringing together thought leaders to reflect deeply on the complex challenges of our time. We are proud, as the University of Johannesburg, to continue working alongside MISTRA in curating such critical conversations. We are especially privileged this afternoon to host our keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Naledi Pandor, Chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and a true stateswoman of our democracy. Shall we give her a big round of applause? Dr. Pandor's lifelong contribution in education, home affairs, and international relations, coupled with her deep intellect and principled leadership, make her an ideal voice to reflect on the theme, geopolitics, has the world moved under our feet? Question mark, close quote. This theme could not be more timely. We meet at a moment when global alliances are shifting, when old certainties are eroding, and when new technological, political, and economic forces are reshaping both our world and our place in it. As South Africa prepares to assume the presidency of the G20, these discussions are not only academic, but central to how we chart our collective future. I wish to extend our appreciation to MISTRA, and in particular, Mr. Joel Nechitenze and his team for their unwavering commitment to fostering independent critical reflection on matters of national and global importance and concern. Shall we give them a big round of applause? I also wish to thank my colleagues at the University of Johannesburg who have worked tirelessly to make this event possible. And I warmly welcome our distinguished guests. We see you, including members of the diplomatic corps, government, civil society, business, and of course our staff and students and scholars, all protocol observed. And I know I might have missed some of you in my earlier introduction. We academics are not very good with protocol, please forgive me. But let us engage this lecture not only as an intellectual exercise, but as an opportunity to reflect on our responsibilities as good citizens of both South Africa and of the world. With that, it is my pleasure to declare the annual Mapungubwe Lecture 2025 officially open, and please join me in welcoming our distinguished keynote speaker, Dr. Honorable Naledi Pandor. Thank you. The word epidemiologist, the director had asked me to call it out epidemiologist.
And of course, the audience understand why. I had to let you do that yourself. Thank you very, very much. You say those of you in the world of academia is very bad with protocol. I'm a Generation X, so I'm even worse. But thank you. Your staff have been calling me Prof. Outside of protocol, and I feel like maybe they're prophesying over me by calling me Prof. I take that for once the protocol worked in my favor. Thank you very much for that warm welcome. I'm sure everybody feels that, and those of you who are online, we have not forgotten about you. Stay with us in the room. As I am going to introduce our keynote speaker, I'm going to ask those of you who are online to please use the Q&A function on Zoom so that we can pick up your questions and we will then be able to deal with those questions later. Those of you who are in the room, jot your questions down, and may I ask that when we get to that time that you keep your questions as succinct as possible. You know, we have these moments where we come together to just reflect. An analogy that I like to use is that of a hurricane. When I talk to my coachees, you know, we in the world out there, we're all swimming in the storm, and where the world is today, it feels like the hurricane is just growing bigger and bigger and bigger, if it is not multiple hurricanes coming in a row. But right in the middle of a hurricane is the eye of the storm. And in the eye of the storm, there's stillness. So these are the moments that we can come into a place of stillness, where we can hear each other, where we can reflect, so that when we go back into the storm, we go in far more equipped. And there's no better person that I can think of who can lead us through this eye of the storm moment in reflection as my dear minister. So you're always just going to be minister to me, so that should be me. Dr. Grace Naledi Mandisa Pandor. She's the chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Foundation Board of Trustees. Born on 7 December 1953, just before people get bonuses. So your birthday's just a little off, I think. Dr. Pandor is South Africa's former Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, and that's where I know her from, and I can absolutely attest to the fact that she has always been one of the hardest working ministers. If anybody were to ask me, what is the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think about Dr. Pandor is, yo, that woman grabs. She works. She takes the job very, very, very seriously. And she was in that position from 2019 to 2024. She was part of the ministerial team of the Cabinet of South Africa that initiated the genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. She was appointed the new chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation from 1st October 2024. She will be the third person to hold the position since Nelson Mandela established the organization in 1999. Grace. Dr. Pandor became an MP in 1994 and has amassed impressive experience in positions of public office, including Deputy Chief Whip of the ANC in the National Assembly from 1995 to 1998. There's a fine for that. Served as the Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces in 1998 and Chairperson from 1999 to 2004. Dr. Pandor's experience in education policy planning made her a welcome appointment as South Africa's Minister of Education in 2004. She has been a member of Cabinet ever since and has served her country in the following portfolios: an emphasis on serve. Not just a hard worker, but a hard worker with the heart of a servant, servant leadership. Minister of Education, that was 2004 to 2009. Minister of Science and Technology, 2009 to 2012. Minister of Home Affairs, 2012 to 2014. Minister of Science and Technology, 2014 to 2018. And Minister of Higher Education and Training, 2018 to 2019. You were really in the trenches, for sure. Earned your stripes. Dr. Pandor holds a PhD from the University of Pretoria and has been awarded honorary doctorates by the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, Stellenbosch University, University of Lisbon, and University College Dublin. When I grow up, I want to be like you. When they read my CV, it must read like this. Additionally, on 28 February 2025, she was appointed as honorary professor in education by the University of Pretoria. Upon being awarded Germany's highest federal award, the Grand Cross of Merit, the German ambassador to South Africa, Walter Lindner, said, "Pandor is for us a symbol of the new South Africa, modern, innovative, dedicated to scientific progress, and also outstanding female leadership." She's married to Mr. Sharif Pandor. He introduced himself to me earlier on, and I said, I won't say what I said. But sir, you are very blessed. And they have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. With that, my minister, please come.
I hope you'll still feel like clapping at the end. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Deputy Vice Chancellor Paswana Mfuya, Deputy Minister now, Excellencies, members of the diplomatic corps, leadership from various sectors, Mr. Executive, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to have been asked by Mr. To present this annual lecture, but I keep kicking myself for having agreed, because I just arrived from England from a whole series of lectures, and I hope that Dr. Netitenja at the end will agree that I've tried. So let me begin then. Yusuf Muhammad and Albert Mbiatem, writing in 2021, begin their book on leadership and peace with a foreword by the former president of Timor-Leste, President Ramos Horta. He forthrightly states, We are living in particularly challenging times. Liberal and social democracies are being overrun by intolerant far-right ideologies that embrace ethno-nationalism, xenophobia, racism, exclusion, and violence. These virulent ideologies thrive in many other parts of the world. They are dangerously undermining democracy and the rule of law, fundamental freedoms, and human rights. That was published in 2021. Where are we now? Well, the question that all of us are seeking answers to relates to a suspicion that a seismic global shift may be underway, and that its true nature and purpose might remain opaque for some time. Thus, those who are in the driving seat should prepare for a bumpy, uncertain, constantly shifting drive and be ready and nimble in changing gears. When we listen to seasoned pundits and public intellectuals, they're still attempting to analyze and theorize about the landslide 2024 electoral victory of President Trump. The curious musing and scrutiny arise from their observation of the first term missteps and mishaps, and arguably inadequate responsiveness to COVID-19 then, rejection of science in a leading research nation, increased antipathy toward diversity, and glaring neglect of the rule of law. They thought all of these would lead to a loss. The broad Paul expectation was that he would not perform well, even if he won. How did the ground shift to a landslide degree for American voters? And how was this candidate the only primary option? Has the ground shifted for all the globe? Has the world moved under our feet while we were sleeping? When we ponder the moment, it is easy to forget that the signs were there in the first Trump administration. The difference may be intensity and a newly energized, very robust intent on foreign policy and international trade disruptions. The answer to whether the world has shifted has to begin with scrutiny of the character and posture of the Biden administration up to 2024, particularly its failure to sustain established Democratic Party confidence in international law, multilateral cooperation, and reasonable trade terms with China, or terms agreed through the World Trade Organization, as well as its inadequate response to a nervous public that latched on to the untruths of fake news and seemed to embrace the belief that America had lost its way. Interestingly, the way, as implied by the voting pattern, signaled troubling departure, I argue, from policy and practices traditionally associated with policy and practice in the United States of America. Some examples of these are a stance on immigration, indicating the American dream was no longer an open invitation, and that an open, inclusive electoral democracy embraced for many decades was no longer regarded as legitimate. And women's reproductive rights and equality were and could be severely undermined. And judicial independence, a cornerstone of American democracy, was to suffer significant reversal. The values and principles associated with established America had suddenly become the irritations of America, and their reversal became a threat to the rest of us. So the ground has shifted, and it is critical to recognize that tectonic shift and to adapt to it. The detail of the missing way for Americans may not always be clearly articulated by them, but it seems to lie somewhere between fear of immigration and migrants, a decline in working class feelings of economic empowerment, often blamed on migrants, and the view that government machinery has become a monstrous, menacing presence in public life. Added to the then increasing sense of an American dilemma is the continuing rise of China as an industrial manufacturing giant, as a confident political global leader, and as an increasingly innovative technology economy, able to produce novel products and processes due to targeted investment in science, innovation, and technology. 50 years ago, Chinese universities did not feature significantly in scientific journals, and we had impressive numbers of Chinese students filling universities in Europe and America. That has changed, with millions attending university in China amidst the growing research profile of their universities. The recent World War commemoration in China has surely added to the consternation. Attendance at that war commemoration is perhaps one of the most significant signs that world shifting is underway. Furthermore, India has also grown in economic prowess and smartly built a niche in digital technology skills, in surgical medicine prowess, and in management of tropical diseases. Efforts by China and India to combat poverty and create a thriving middle class have created a consumer client base that is more than 5 times that of America. And thus the two form together a formidable economic force. Both countries have smartly entered the creative arts and invested in fashion, in film, in culinary excellence, and in music, astutely asserted that cultural power and political impact can merge gracefully. East Asia has also become a powerful economic hub for tourism, for manufacturing, and for the development of energy resources. Boasting large populations, Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore with capital, and Thailand have the capability to wield significant influence on global affairs, and yet they seem largely distant from current geopolitical tensions. The one matter that flares up and involves them in the geopolitical sparring of China and America is that of the control of the South China Seas, and at times the imposition of tariffs, though that is often tenuous for that region, for some interesting reasons. In the Pacific Rim, Japan and South Korea are economic and political heavyweights, and while largely stable, face the menacing presence of North Korea. Japan has a global agenda primarily tied to the United States of America and has had to work at improving trade links with an increasingly capable China. Perhaps the ground beneath their feet has shifted too. The recent South Korean decision to purchase 103 Boeing planes from the United States of America, announced by the very new President Lee at the White House just this week may indicate how South Korea plans to manage the shifting ground. All of this means that for the first time in centuries, America and Europe, the West, have effective non-European competitors that understand strategic imperatives and utilize opportunities effectively. It is difficult to describe Europe's place in this competitive context. The region continues to be a powerful global unit, but over time, it has somewhat appeared to lose currency due to a seeming deference to America, while being one of the most established in institutional formation and the most wealthy regional bloc. Excessive bureaucracy, inadequate innovation, and attachment to traditional notions of the state have profiled Europe as uninventive, rather traditional, and focus largely on own interests rather than global progress. In an article on the United States and European Union and company formation and profit within them, with respect to the growing digital market, Marcus Mogarian succinctly compares digital innovation and capacity in America and Europe. He reports that no EU company founded in the past 50 years has a market capitalization exceeding 100 billion euros, while all 6 US companies valued above $1 trillion were created during that same period. A telling fault line for Europe may lie in too dedicated a focus on internal European policy, on regulation as protection, on agricultural subsidies, and on issues such as public service pensions and their access, and thus failures to promptly recognize and respond to looming threats and desires for greater freedoms, such as those growing in the Sahel, or on the need to devise new approaches to the long-standing tensions with the Russian Federation. Get a sense of a lack of imagination. What place does Africa occupy in these shifting sands? It has significant strategic potential and unrealized promise in some of its lead economies, such as Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Egypt, Algeria, and Mauritius. Nonetheless, our continent has yet to make good out of its abundant promise and to learn to be so as a strategic, united economic force rather than national states trying ineffectively to engage with giants. Tragically, our continent has not succeeded fully in weaning itself of dependency on aid, on the reality of long-term leaders that cannot shift the ground, on the reality of corruption and poor capacity in executing development plans. Africa appears locked into existing positions while the ground is shifting. Belief that rescue exists from Europe, America, or China is misplaced, and greater investment in African excellence and African performance is critically urgent. For Africa, the demographic dividend of millions of young Africans is being wasted as the skills and education systems have not been able to offer young people quality education and skills that contribute to economic growth, nor to offer investment to support entrepreneurship. Weak client states have rendered public service that is incompetent, arrogant, and crooked, And when the media reports on what I'm saying, they mustn't put words into my mouth. Because I make speeches, I don't mention a name, but they insert names into my contribution. And I do offer to them to come and get copies because I write down most things. So don't read into me, ask me rather. So given this inadequacy, the result is that a needy people, Africans, seeking only a change in their lives, are turning to attitudes and practices that devalue democracy and re-encourage attention to a strong man who will produce results. This is evident from the responses to the multiple coups in the past 4 years and the popularity of former senior military officials who don the cloak of head of state and self-proclaimed revolutionaries. Countries experiencing these political changes are desperately hanging on to the hope that this time things will be different. Our continent has been acknowledged as a very wealthy continent with vast mineral resources, abundant arable land, and a keen and enterprising youth. And yet, it has the poorest people in the globe, the least literate, and very few with disposable assets. In the past 2 decades, internecine conflicts, civil war, and rebel incursions have severely impacted on Africa's prospects. Even more worrying, the imprint of illogical and angry extremism has entered Africa under the guise of the prejudice of Islamophobia. Conflicting groupings all emanate from generally poor backgrounds, yet they have the military means to exact a terrible toll on infrastructure and innocent civilians, as we see in Sudan, in Chad, in Central African Republic. Practices alien to Africans, such as public beheadings, bombings, rape of women and girls, have been part of this expansion in African conflicts. Now, if we look back for a moment, during the 90s decade, several African countries illustrated Africa's ability to achieve growth and progress. If I recall statistics in the mid-90s, of the top 20 growing economies, 9 were at that time African. It's no longer the case today. That period of prosperity through infrastructure development and investment in agriculture needs to be revived today, alongside increased support for ocean economies, increased renewable energy resource development, water infrastructure development, and a plan for Africa for management and pricing of its minerals. My reflections on the African context are purposely lengthy, due largely to the well-developed practice implying that the faults in Africa emanate from elsewhere, and that we as Africans do not have any responsibility for our condition. This is patently false, as is illustrated by a string of self-inflicted failures. Failure to act on the plethora of development plans agreed under the auspices of the then OAU, and even today, failing to vigorously implement Agenda 2063, the blueprint for the Africa we want. The reality of external negative and at times friendly interference in Africa's affairs is acknowledged, but the notion of complete African innocence for its dilemmas is patently false. Now, when we look at what are the politics lying behind all of this, we perhaps would agree that it is plausible that the world has shifted. And so it is necessary, as we look at this shift, to consider the ideological underpinnings that accompany this change, because change is not always good. Is this shift an advance in progressive values and ambitions, or is it a regression? What of the left and the right today? The ideological influences that are impacting on nations, organizations, and regional blocs today are difficult to neatly compartmentalize. Of course, I'm sure for the students here, your academics give you the easy answers, but I can tell you it's absolutely difficult. Do we continue to have the clear divide of left, center, and right? Or are the lines increasingly blurred? In the period following the Second World War, the ideological cleavages and attachments seemed clearly delineated. The right wing and the center existed in parts of the West and some of Latin America. The left wing in East Europe, in parts of the Caribbean, in Asia and Eurasia, particularly under the communist ideology, best expressed by the Soviet Union and the then China. Conservative ideology was associated with the then declining National Socialism in West Europe and the defeat of the Nazi regime, which somewhat drove right-wing adherents underground. They didn't disappear completely. Mariusz Ostrowski, writing in 2023, suggests the divides, as we may have used them in the past, have undergone changes that have resulted in some difficulties in clearly describing the distinctions in these political leanings. Members of society we regard or may regard as very liberal can be the ones pushing the most virulent xenophobia. Those seen as conservative or on the right may be the staunchest fighters for workers' rights. He argues that expanding and contracting these ideological labels is often part of the bread and butter of ideological contestation. We see this to some degree in this country of ours, with those proclaiming white genocide and an end to land redistribution cast as revolutionary, while we who support transformation are portrayed as behind the times. The ideals of the left served as an important resource for the struggle against colonialism in Africa and other regions of the world. The South African liberation movements benefited from significant support from the left in the struggle, with links built with the Soviet Union and particularly with Russia. However, it is also possibly accurate to argue that individuals with vastly different political leanings played important roles in our liberation through civil society organizations that form the heart of the international anti-apartheid movement. Globally, we see increased use of the label right, particularly currently in the face of the MAGA, Make America Great Again movement, and following right-leaning party successes in Germany, in the United Kingdom local elections, in France's local and assembly elections, and in Argentina's swing to the right. The left is sometimes described as ascendant in parts of Latin America, especially Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. The right tends to be ascribed hostility to immigration, xenophobia, homophobia, pro-Israel beliefs, and austerity economics. Although the Labour Party in the UK has some of these features, they would probably strongly resist being labeled right-wing. The best approach may be to gauge political party policies on workers' rights, on equity, on issues of race, issues of immigration, human rights, and international law. I would argue that the left has been in decline for a long period, unable to rescue itself from suggestions of being weak on economic growth, soft on human rights, and insufficiently attentive to domestic interests and concerns in their national setting. The right benefits from an assumed imagery of toughness, while left is often unable to challenge being depicted as weak. In fact, I was reading an article, I can't remember the author, and it begins with an excerpt from one of these American drama series. And in it, the left and right argue with each other. And the left is saying, but I believe in equity, but I support human rights. And the right is saying, you're doing nothing about the people. You are not serving the interests of the people. And the left responds, okay, I may have fallen for you. That's how this author describes it. South Africa and those African countries that allow political parties are witness to the emergence of an increased ideological distinctiveness among political parties. And here I'm really on dangerous ground because I don't quite understand the political party. Some of the parties are rabidly anti-migrant or anti-African foreigner. Others are firmly against Black economic empowerment, and others strongly supportive of state intervention in the economy. The oddity is that within those that support various forms of empowerment, ethnic chauvinism enjoys a lofty position, as does homophobia. So it is difficult to argue that the left is strictly so and the right is clearly such. I am uncertain as to the nature of political discussion that takes place in our various political parties, as distinct from their discussion of their desire to be elected to parliament. The suspicion is that an agenda item on left or right might be interpreted as marching orders rather than political discourse. Ideologies have certainly shifted along with this shifting ground. Thus, while the Trump policies may, for our purpose, suit a right-leaning compartment determination to have a right-leaning compartment, their determination to have state share ownership of defense companies, which was reported on this week, local production, and protectionist tariffs may be presumed as more left. The strong signal from Beijing this week of a seismic reordering does not directly provide ideological insights, apart from a clarity that direct engagement on a new world order is on the cards. The lack of ideological clarity sometimes poses potent threats and is particularly deadly for the pursuit of a human rights-oriented policy approach. The tolerance of many countries, of Israel's allies, particularly for the genocide in Gaza, indicates the obfuscation that can arise when there is significant dilution of political ideology. Consider for a moment international law development post the Second World War. The immediate post-war period was characterized by the emergence of political beliefs that appeared to promote a more humane and tolerant global community. the creation of the United Nations as the premier world multilateral institution initiated the opportunity to develop a system of international law that would guide human rights access, international cooperation, and the protection of civilians from the devastating effects of war. That then hopeful period gave life to the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Convention on the Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, and other instruments and institutions designed to protect the vulnerable and innocent. Human rights law and international humanitarian law were all codified in this period into a body of protection against future wars. A flaw then that influences and shapes global cooperation today was the modeling of the United Nations Security Council on the basis of victor, vanquish, and protector. The 5 states that allocated the Security Council veto power to themselves created an unrepresentative and undemocratic practice that has hampered the UN from playing a role of trusted arbiter in world affairs. So, while the ground shifted then, it merely exaggerated and affirmed existing power structures. Nonetheless, this was, I argue, and has been a historic advance for the globe. The collapse of the Soviet Union, the creation of European states, keen to break ties with the Soviet Union, dealt a severe blow to the ideology of the left and created ideological confusion for countries that had strong ties with the Soviet Union and that had relied on it to support liberation struggles and the end of colonial domination. The right morphed into presumed liberal ideology, a break from the colonial imperial present and a more nuanced relationship of donor and exploiter of mineral resources. For citizens in Europe, life assumed a drive for resource accumulation, shift work that paid the bills, and very slim hope of a full escape from the challenge of a mediocre existence. The late 1970s Conservative Party of the UK had a direct assault on trade unions, which severely diminished the role of trade unions and converted many of them to pliant supplicants, exerting minimal influence on progressive thought and seeming to desert progressive ambitions on worker rights, respect for diversity, and rejection of racism and exploitative economic policy. That shift has had a lengthy growth period and is maturing today as we see in trade union tolerance of human rights abuses. Imagine if at the time of our struggle, trade unions had refused to implement sanctions. It's what we're seeing today. The decline of the left and the rise of the right collided with the impact of the attack on Iraq and the ensuing rise in Islamophobia linked to Zionism. A significant component of international relations is framed by this recent yet ancient history. It consists of a toxic and drugging mix of conflict of religions and civilizations, racist notions of superiority, and the enduring belief that difference means challenge. The failure to see offense in Gaza, as contrasted with perspectives on Ukraine, pointedly emphasized how human beings are defined as less worthy depending on race, geography, faith, or gender. The shift has been permitted currency and energy for several decades. Morality and humane norms have been surrendered to the holders of the purse. Developing countries and their poorest are the main losers in this declining ideological present, with billionaires and multinationals occupying supreme power to direct global affairs. Now, my dismal assessment should not be read to suggest ideology doesn't matter. An urgent reinsertion of positive values and principles is vitally needed. Nelson Mandela recalled Senator John Lewis when he made the famous troublemaker speech, in which Lewis stated, "The world needs troublemakers who make good trouble." In deference to that important call, the Nelson Mandela Foundation has adopted the Making Good Trouble theme as part of its legacy work. We encourage everybody to make good trouble when it can. Restoring progressive values is what foundations making good trouble need to work on today. Just imagine for a moment how easy it is for rights to dissipate. Research, innovation, and higher education all thrive in a context that prizes and honors freedom of expression. Civil society and youth support for the Palestine cause for freedom has witnessed a massive attack on freedom of expression and academic freedom. The practice of telling universities what to teach and think, which essentially disappeared under Henry VIII in the 15th century, has found new life in Europe and America, with universities, research institutes, and even media caving in under state pressure. Nothing has evidenced the sad diminution of progressive thought than the collapse which forced academics into being the implementers of actions they would have died before implementing 20 years ago. These failings result from complacency, which results from early success in enjoyment of civil and political rights, and a developed belief that governance is benign. The idea, for example, that thousands of workers could be dismissed from government employment in weeks would probably be regarded as wild imagination here in South Africa. It took less than 2 months, with not much of a whimper in the United States of America, from trade unions and other organs of civil society. Retaining energetic connections with democratic political processes is something I believe we in South Africa should never neglect. Our history of mass mobilization and participation has created a healthy political activism, but it is vital to strengthen and retain this broad civic education and civic activism. Authoritarian conduct has fascinating snowball characteristics. Now, if you're totally bored, Mr. told me I must speak at length. As I said, authoritarian conduct has fascinating snowball characteristics. Negative actions may begin with instruction to end protests, then change into curricula written by a politician, and then instruction on who to admit, and finally, state control of all Senate appointments. In the research domain, views of non-scientists on the efficacy of vaccines can develop into new protocols on infant inoculation, then become false statistics on infection prevalence, on deaths, and so on. A culture of rejecting intellectual excellence can very readily become a universal culture of mediocrity. The crowning of a big man who offers office positions, money, and undeserved clout can result from the laziness of complacency. This is the political embrace of the emperor's clothes myth. Our country, South Africa, has a very good constitution that attempts to address vast areas of socioeconomic, civil, and political belonging. Critics sometimes complain about judicial independence, hoping, I assume, to have biddable judges who will ignore the law. This is not to suggest the document is perfect, but compared to many, I prefer it. Others suggest radical amendments, including on land redistribution. The Constitution provides for this, but action on the provision has been very lamentable. A further demand by some is that for parliamentary supremacy. I'm not clear as to the meaning of this, but we had that surely under the apartheid parliament with no checks and balances. Complacency must also be avoided by non-state actors. The notion that citizens do not have social agency is patronizing and a recipe for very slow progress in development. Citizens in countries straining under the weight of authoritarian democracy probably become complacent, and they assume their rights will always be upheld by those chosen to govern. Public political expression should articulate preferred policies, preferred rights, preferred practices, and not be shy about stating clearly. The speedily evolving context described lengthily and boringly here requires focused, committed, knowledgeable, and visionary leadership. Leaders whose intention is maintaining stability due to fear of disruption are sure to fail their nations. Leaders today have to be clear on purpose and goals. For all the faults ascribed to the leader of America, he has clear purpose and vision, much as we may not agree with it or whatever. It is make America great again by punishing other countries, by using military and economic might, and by somehow convincing the working class majority that every reversal is temporary and is in their interest and will guarantee greatness. It is tragic that many will experience the flaws of failing to use power for positive objectives too late for recovery. In our context, making Africa great for the first time in centuries should be the key goal of our leaders. There is sometimes concern that the preferred targets in Africa remain hazy and unclear. Small, weak states compete unendingly and fail to collaborate on acquiring shared prosperity. Many African analysts comment that African economies are small and not likely to reach levels of growth to sustain their development plans. Yet, our countries continue to plan individually and thus fail individually. Visionary leadership with clarity of ideology is a must for Africa. Old notions of limited unity, failed projects, and inconsistency need to be replaced by vision, direction, and collaboration. Africa is confronting bullying demands for its critical minerals. It's unclear as to whether an Africa response and plan on these strategic resources has been agreed, nor whether implementation of an agreement is underway. The imposition of unwieldy tariffs on African goods has probably been responded to without an Africa strategy. It is possible that I don't know as much as I should. It's possible that far more is being done. If that is the case, improved communication will be most welcome. If there is no collaborative response, it may be better for us not to know. However, it must be stressed that battling powerful bullies requires full engagement and collective action. Africa needs to recognize and acknowledge its strategic power and use it to good effect. At present, we still act as supplicants. We have much to offer, and we should let the world know that. Much should be made of BRICS, creating its own bank, and we should build on that foundation to establish international financing diversity. Focused leadership should know what to do. So now we're facing a digital world. Where are we there? Digital technology has become a significant and potent political and knowledge force. The development of artificial intelligence is creating a very large gap between rich and poor. Added to that, social media and artificial intelligence tools can contribute to political confusion and the promotion of lies as truth. There is a real danger that the shifting sands of technology, while being a great technology advance, can serve as the purveyor of ignorance and the absence of intellectual rigor. I always get so nervous sometimes when I'm with young students and they start talking about the competence of ChatGPT. It worries me to know it. Our societies need to be nimbler in responding effectively to dishonesty via social media and the use of hatred and misogyny to create followers and influence. South Africa has been a victim of these false claims in the current white genocide claims promoted by organizations and individuals in our country. The surprise for me has been the lack of informed debate and fact-checking on this matter. Individuals using imagery and technology to lie have escaped scrutiny and effectively probing questions. Interestingly, the response of some laudable opinion writers in our country has been to call on government and the ANC to respect America, given its economic weight and influence. It says, you are cheeky. You should respect this people. No such calls for respect of Africa were ever made when Africa was called a dirty name in the first term. The world's shifting. It does not mean we collapse in that momentum. We need to strengthen the grip of our feet and find our center. The inflection point is a moment in which Africa could be so much more, and we should use it to strengthen multipolarity, international cooperation, and the creation of a better world. Now, before I read the commentary in the newspapers tomorrow, I must reiterate that South Africa does intend, through the leadership of our country, to retain good relations with the United States of America, while also strengthening our relations with other countries. We have benefited from the presence of hundreds of American companies employing thousands in South Africa. In the automotive sector, our workers have developed excellent skills and can be utilized to build competence in other technology sectors. South Africa needs to have the practice of building relations based on mutual interests rather than unequal partners. Our interventions and responses should acknowledge the importance of newer and growing trade partners, such as on our continent, in East Asia, and of course, China. President Ramaphosa has been emphatic about continuing to build solid relations with the United States of America, while also being diverse and complementary in approaches to existing and new opportunities. So what of our G20 moment? The chairship of G20 has created excellent opportunities for South Africa to showcase our country and our continent. The South African theme unashamedly confirms our commitment to positive values of diversity, shared prosperity, and inclusion. The efficient hosting by South Africa of over 100 meetings has illustrated our ability to manage large events and created a fresh opportunity in this climate to strengthen links with Europe and the world's premier emerging economy. South Africa needs to use the summit of G20 to have dedicated reflection on the globe, on international law and its place, on inclusive growth, and on strategies to relieve Africa of the yawning post-COVID debt that is hindering Africa's progress. If a new alliance on humane values can be built among the 19 who will attend, the prospects for this challenging world will, I believe, be more positive, and it will be wonderful that our country, South Africa, will have played a new leadership role in establishing, hopefully, a new global ethos. So, has the world shifted? It is shifting, not complete, but happening. And we need to be ready to play an effective role in that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 7th of December, 1953, was a good day for South Africa and the world. A courageous female voice was born. And today, we've had a matriarch stand in front of us, blazing the trail and encouraging us to make good trouble. That one stuck with the minister. And I hope the way you have framed it for us as Africans, that we have strategic potential, but we're locked in while the ground is shifting. And we need to start to think about rowing together, otherwise we're going to sink separately. And as you were talking about strengthening the grip of defeat, I was reminded of a proverb that says, when the drum beat changes, the dance step must adapt. And we're calling in Africa, to use your words, visionary leaders with purpose. Couldn't have said that better. Thank you very much for those courageous words. I'm now going to hand over to the moderator just to remind those of you who are online Please post your questions in the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll pick those questions up. Mistra decided to bring the big guns, and UJ decided, they must also bring big guns. So they sent two professors, and they went from epidemiology to neurodiversity, and it's like serious stuff here, tongue-twisting stuff. We are now going to have Professor Maximus Sefoto lead us in moderating the question and answer section, and with your permission, Prof, I'll do the same in terms of not going through your full bio in the interest of time as well. He's the director of the Center for Neurodiversity at the University of Johannesburg, and if you read his bio, there are words in here like instrumental in the establishment of African Association and of Neurodiversity. That's big stuff. And then he's got words in here that is like, he's a brainchild from the soil of Africa. I added that in. I'm going to hand over to you to lead us into the question and answer section.
May I be allowed, ladies and gentlemen, to observe the protocol that was given to us before and respect Mena Lady with the following. Naledi Yameso Chabela di Chaba. Because you have enlightened us so much and giving us a mandate to make good trouble. But again, challenging the African universities to make good epistemic and intellectual trouble, allowing citizens' agency for making Africa great again. May I be allowed to say that we agree with you. It is shifting. I would like to start with colleagues, the people who are online first. We have two questions for you, Doctor. The first one is from Rashid Motala, who is asking, how has the imposition of the relative value of currencies of the Western pound, dollar, euro, etc., to African currencies by the West contributed to Africa not having any country in the top 20, and now compared to 9 African countries, and being in the top 20 in the 1990s. The second question is from Dasen Naidu, who writes, capitalism has its grip. Does our educational system allow for leaders and creators to be made? These are the two questions that we have now from those online. I would like to align with what you said, Madam, that we ask for crispness in asking our questions to allow Doctor to respond directly to those. We have two questions now. I would like to allow Doctor to start with those, and then when we get to the room, I will take three as we go so that we can allow smoother movement. Over to you, Doctor. Are we going to have a mic for me? On the podium, right in front of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
He doesn't need to use it. He doesn't know it's money.
Yeah, hopefully everybody can hear me. And clearly,
I can hear online. It's echoing when she answers.
Okay.
today.
There is a mic next to you, I think. It's speaking. Yes. Yes. Yes, it's speaking. Yes, ma'am.
Somewhere there. Yeah, you see what I was saying about technology? With respect to the impact of European currency, clearly, we've allowed Europe, America, and the rest to benefit significantly from the modest public revenue that we generate, because all payments and trade are in Western currency. This is why we've been discussing in BRICS, and the government could really be better on that, the use of own currencies for purposes of trade. As a beginning, the proposal seems to be among the BRICS countries, but with the intention for a broader payment system to be developed. I don't know how far that should go, but of course, one of the key concerns that we should have on the continent is the concern that has been expressed by a number of the French-speaking African countries that mention that they still deposit public revenue in banks outside, in the banks of the former colonizing authority. And this is very odd, and almost to a degree that for purposes of withdrawal or payment, permission has to be sought, and signatures elsewhere have to be provided prior to your own resources being utilized. So this matter of a financial payment system internationally is a huge issue that I believe the continent needs to deliberate on and resolve. It is a barrier to our growth. It is a barrier hampering our ability to trade effectively, to invest in productive capacity as well. But let me then return to the issue I keep raising of smallness. If you have 54 currencies, you'll have a problem. Yeah, issues of equivalence, etc., ability to exchange, and so on. Because if you use a currency, you need to be able to exchange it. And there should be agreement on it. And if it is not worth the paper it is printed on, you have a very serious problem. So the notion of African unity, and now that we have the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement, perhaps discussing movement toward an African agreed payment system and eventually an African currency is something we should look at. Part of our dilemma is that division into 50 blocks. Capitalism has been allowed to be a very powerful force by all of us. We are all material beings. We are all drawn into its web. In terms of education, I think our curriculum does try to teach creativity and introduce new subjects and concepts to young people. But you know that our legacy is a very unequal system, and so the real opportunities are the better of school. We need to have more curriculum diversity in schools, in rural communities, in small towns, and villages and so on. And we haven't gone as far as we can with respect to that. It's also worrying as we think about education and creativity that statistics are indicating in a decade or so, we're going to be short of teachers. And yet it's a key profession for preparing the next generation of intellectuals and skills. So I do think our country needs to put its policy thought to what it can do to intervene in this approaching problem.
Thank you, Doctor. Can I see by show of hands? Madam, you'll be the first. Say you'll be the second, and I'll go back there with Madam. I'll come to you after that. Thank you so much. May you introduce yourself briefly, please, shortly?
Hi, my name is Vashti. I'm a research fellow over at the South African Institute of International Affairs. I recall a memorable moment in 2022 Dr. Mano, when US Secretary then Antony Blinken came to visit us on a state visit. And in the press conference after, you indicated that South Africa would not be bullied. At the time, we were talking in relation to our European partners on the issue of the Ukraine-Russia war. You have since reiterated that narrative in relation to the United States last year, even during Human Rights Day this year, at a speech you gave, and the president has also taken up this sentiment. My question then is, what does it look like behind closed doors in particular for South Africa to be bullied? And underlying this question, it's good troublemaking. Underlying this question, what are the costs and benefits of a global South country to pursue its strategic and moral interests? Thank you.
Thank you so much. The gentleman over there. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Queen Mamas. I'm an academic activist. Just a quick question from us. The first one is that comments actually. I think there's a relationship between the rise of nationalism, essentialist identity politics, and socio-economic inequality. So in other words, when we think about identity politics, we have to think about the economic structure of it, which is based on market fundamentalism. So then surely we should also be questioning that structure if we want to deal with the problem that arise from that fuel that identity politics that we see. In other words, question capitalism. Secondly, I think that I agree that the hegemony of the US has been challenged economically and materially. I'm not sure that the cultural and the social capital hegemony of the US is being challenged. So you have the rise of India, you have the rise of China economically, but people around the globe still want to assimilate towards the cultural and the normative values of what the US has projected on the world. I think that's an interesting conundrum.
Thank you, sir. There is a lady up there.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Saraku, and I'm a third-year law student at the University of Alaska. So my question for you, Dr. Pando, is when it comes to, when it comes to our region, being the African region, when we look at different countries like Ghana, when we speak about the unification of the diamond industry and the economic diversification, it becomes a question of whether different countries with so many different yet similar histories of colonialism can actually bring their backgrounds together to a single unit where economic diversity is and also we have at different states of the world, let's say with Zimbabwe, they struggle with things much more deeper than we do at times. So how can we actually manage that and reconcile our political backgrounds with colonialism to become a better economic factor for all of this?
Thank you so much. That is our first round. Doc, you want to take those, and then we can get into the second batch.
So I'm asking my husband, should I continue to answer? The reason is he's been sort of quarreling with me, saying you always answer, you should tell other people to answer. Now I'm asking him, What should I do? And maybe I should turn to John and let him answer. And I'll come to Abba Omar as well. Ah, you see, he's dodging. They're spoiling my marriage. I think, I agree with you, and a lot of the literature is actually saying you've got to address the structure of character of economy in order to really have progressive movement. If you don't do that, then you just tinker. So I would agree with you, and I do think though that on the issue of cultural hegemony, you are seeing a shift. You are seeing a movement. There's a presence of such a variety of creative art, of culinary experience, and huge business development that is distinct from what has existed, from McDonald's, etc. For example, in the Cape, in a large part of our population, we've decided we boycott Coca-Cola. An alternative has been developed by beverage producers in the working class community. So it's not entirely visible to everybody, but it's been done. So I think you can make a positive movement, but you have to have the will, the energy, and the resources to do this. So, I don't think that these changes or challenging of hegemony would be easy, but I worry if we just resort to say, this is so powerful, there's nothing that we can do. And I think that what China and India have illustrated is you can't begin to hack it. Might be slow over time, but you need to start somewhere. And I think collectively as Africa, if we could work together, we could begin. But we need to agree, and that's where the importance of the ideological orientation arises. Without that sense that I'm actually engaged in challenging received norms, you won't really, I think, develop the most impactful approaches. So yeah, it is tough, but has to be worked at. Well, we are different countries, we hold different mineral resources, it is true. In the Gulf states, they have different forms of crude oil, but they agreed on OPEC. And they're a powerful force on pricing, on production, on control of those resources. So why are we unable to develop our own pricing power? Well, what is it about Africans that says we can't unite? Why must we always have to be persuaded that we should work together when it makes clear sense that it is the weight of the collective that could have an impact, rather than the individual? For example, if you look at what has followed the agreement on the Kimberley diamonds agreement, you have seen improved African management of that resource. Of course, Belgium is constantly trying to push against it, as with the recent proposal last year. But we made a difference with cleaning in Botswana, cutting in parts of South Africa, and Antwerp having a part. It wants to reduce our part and have larger control. But thus far, we've resisted. And so there's the argument. You have to get Liberia in, you've got to get Sierra Leone in, have to have Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, all working collectively together and starting to set the parameters. Zimbabwe and South Africa, with their collective strength on platinum group resource, has to work and reckon with Russia and other producers and really look at how best to approach them. Why is gold at 3,000 an ounce and platinum at 1,300? Should be far stronger given its role, especially in this moment of tariff threats. So collective, I think, determination and clear policy on that is really important. Is it possible? I don't know if the politicians think that way, but that's where civil society becomes important. You know, I think civil society also has to recognize that it should generate new ideas and not only be protesting on public service issues, but on larger issues of protection of work, of change of structure of the economy, greater absorption, and really work with academic institutions to refine what we place in the public domain.
The question for the lady here.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry. Is that what happens behind closed doors? I think there's a 20-year limit. You know, something like that. But it's very difficult and challenging, I think, for developing countries. South Africa is fortunate in that it is in all the various formations. It's invited to G7, except when it becomes unpopular. It's invited to G20. It participates in the EU, Africa, and all other fora. It's in BRICS and so on. So we have a platform. And I think what has been really valuable is why in those platforms, not all the ideals and approaches are shared, but the opportunity to state your beliefs is very, very significant. And it is possible in the context of very extensive discussion to begin to shift the needle. So you had times when no BRICS declaration would mention the issue of Palestine. Now it's there. No AU would mention something, you know. So it's through consistency, through articulating some of these ideals, and through really asserting the correctness of holding on to international law and international human rights law, which I'm arguing about all the time. Holding on to those because they are really important for the most vulnerable in the world. It's not about elites. It's about those who are impacted. It's about the innocent. And if we allow these instruments to disappear, then we are really harming the fate of the most vulnerable in our society. So it's a matter of being in the room, communicating the idea, withstanding the insults, because you get them, I'm called all sorts of things. Fine, let it happen, but continue, be there. And eventually, there will be, you know, I mean, on the genocide case, initially, what was said to me, ridiculous, no such thing. The very people who said that are saying genocide today. Now, if what we had just retreated and said, oh, you know, the big guns think we're crazy, let's stop. Yes.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I saw a hand here, and you'll be the second one, sir. And I'm trying to look this side. The third hand back there. Then, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of time, it's encroaching upon us. I think we will have this as the last but one round, and then we will conclude with those online. Thank you so much.
My name is Jennifer. My question, you've spoken about international humanitarian law and also the inefficiencies and the problems with the Security Council. The funding cuts have also had a huge implication for the UN specialized agencies. and many of those are now struggling to perform their functions. We've also seen the Secretary General pushing for a massive and possibly ill thought through UN reform. I'd like to hear your views on how you think South Africa and the African Union can play a role in reshaping those, particularly given the presence and the operationality of many of those agencies in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is IOL. So I just have a question around the tensions that are obviously brewing around the world with major powers such as the United States and your China, Russia, having all these issues that they have. So I want to understand from your perspective, what do you think is the future of multilateralism? Oh, sorry, I've always had a problem, pronouncing this word, including, governance structures in the world. And I ask this question because South Africa is associated with these major powers. How then do we navigate around this? And the last question is, there is a general consensus that, the manner in which South Africa handled itself at, in Washington during the meeting with Donald Trump was not really, up to standard. In your, given your leadership experience, how would you have handled that? Or how would you have, thank you very much.
Person working in civil society. So, and I know my time is short, so I'm just saying I'm parking it for the minister, former minister, and others to talk more about it. My name is Hudson Robert. China has been a 30-year advantage over all these groups around critical minerals, controlling, processing, all the value chain. And this is a subtext for the shift in Brown Minister. So we could have a discussion separately. But I also know that you join me in wishing Mandela's Peace of Rwanda and Wayne Saluti and others well in breaking the siege. So my question is unrelated to those 2 points, is how much of the weaknesses that we find for the left and progressive countries or parties is of our own making? When we had power, we didn't implement it. If you look at the UK, for all its problems, they can talk about an NHS that no one can shake. They talk about Spain, public health works. Here we're trying to deal with stuff when we at our weakest. And I really want to ask, so how much of that is self-inflicted wounds?
Thank you, sir. Doctor, over to you.
I think the funding cuts are really worrying and have had a devastating impact, particularly on humanitarian services and even on institutions such as the Human Rights Council and others on the African continent. You're seeing a reduction of staff in a number of regional offices of various UN agencies. So there's a real concern. And what is perhaps of greatest worry is that the wealthier, powerful countries are not prepared to pick up the slack. And so they're saying, let America change and fund again, rather than them increasing their contributions. I have heard policymakers in China speaking about an increased contribution, but I haven't seen it happen as yet. So it is a really worrying time. I think the African Union would be in a really difficult position because it does not have significant resources, but I believe that it could use what it has to offer aid, support, and relief on the continent. We have real problems with refugee camps in Chad, very poor shelter. Sudan, there's huge gaps on food and health services as well. I think the African Union could, through the political organ, offer more assistance to African countries, an eager issue, an African call for aid support. Because, you know, a country can put a few $1 million together and make resources available. And of course, if you put funding forward, you can purchase goods for that support in your own setting, which is what we do in DERCO, which many people don't understand, and they take us to court. That the money is used internally, and it is the goods that are delivered for the humanitarian. So those may be things for consideration. On the subject of UN reform, I really think civil society should make its voice heard, especially through ECOSOC, on reform, one, of the Security Council's composition, on this matter of veto, and on a more democratic process involving the General Assembly. I think these are things that we should hear more on from civil society. The permanent five have failed us terribly, because rather than deciding for humanity, they're settling scores among themselves in the most important peace and security body. So we need to change that fundamentally. For a long time, China was not receptive to reform, especially of the Security Council, but you've seen a greater openness in the past 3 years. So hopefully we can use that momentum. Well, Tuboha, I think that as South Africa, we should be consistent in arguing for a multipolar world, in supporting multilateralism. Because if we allow the destruction of multilateral institutions, we are opening universal room to unipolarity. And then we will be directed by just one country. And you don't want that. So I think multilateralism needs to be understood more clearly, be appreciated by communities broadly. We don't talk enough about what it means. We don't talk enough about common universal frameworks and their importance in international cooperation. So we need to do more on local education on these issues. But as South Africa, from the time of the writing of the Freedom Charter, we've always been an internationalist-oriented people, and we must maintain that character. On Washington, my fears was that a Zelensky would happen. And I'm glad the president of South Africa didn't allow that, because that would have been extremely embarrassing, and we would have ruined the day. It was important that we had a delegation going there, but you can't ignore difficult issues. And I don't agree with the pundits who say it was a disaster. I think what I would have liked to see was a better response on some of the claims, more factually based. But the manner in which the meeting is run is directed toward a particular outcome. And so you can see that speaking time is limited. It's all extremely orchestrated. And in that context, I think we did better than many others.
You've left the lights on.
At least we haven't had, a leader. I saw one leader sitting one day in a meeting with the gentleman, and she was holding her hands like this, and sitting straight like before a principal. And I thought, oh, well, thank goodness I wasn't there. I think Minister Mola is far better diplomat than Minister. We should learn from China, I think, and be speaking to them more. I was encouraged that a week ago, African ministers of minerals had a meeting. I don't know what the conclusions are, but it's a beginning, and we should encourage them to build on that. The ANC has issued a statement today And anybody who thinks I'm not ANC, they're really wrong. I was born in it, I'll always be in it. And they were wishing all South Africans who are on the flotilla intending to deliver aid to Gaza well on their journey. We know it's going to be a difficult journey, but as civil society, on our tweets, on Instagram and elsewhere, we should be saying, well done and courage to you. And say to Israel, allow the people of Gaza to get aid. Yes, indeed. The weakness is of our own making, but always when I try to look at issues of political developments, I also am aware of context. And there are impediments in South Africa. There are very strong efforts at resisting the kind of change that the left would desire. And those who impede control institutions and resources. You know, you're not dealing with a country that was like open sesame. Apartheid is over, come in, and we will allow you to have, access to the kingdom. It's not been like that. The level of opposition has been very strong. And there hasn't been a complementary rapprochement to ensure that there's success in development there. And we should recognize that. And nonetheless, we must maintain our political ideology. And really, for me, it relates to human rights and to efforts to improve the human condition and the condition of Africa.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to close once again with three viewers online. The following questions come from them. Khotalam Mosedi asks, Doctor, what is Minister Pando's thoughts on one currency in Africa and what needs to be done for this to be realized? The second question, Mhlaba Shongwe asks, how can African states collaborate in forming new partnerships with rising global powers and established powers on key areas like security and trade? And lastly, from Peter Vale, can you please comment on the hold that the idea of sovereignty has on our imagination in international relations?
That's what I need to. I think we spoke about, the possibility of one currency earlier.
Yes.
And it really depends on African agreement. It depends on the Lagos notion of an African central bank and on Gaddafi's idea of a united Africa. So if we were to take those steps, we begin to move toward that. I think the precursor, because in the Lagos agreement, there are steps toward African unity. The precursor has been agreement on the AFCFTA, and implementing that is leading us to a path where we move closer and closer to discussion of that idea. But I still think notions of sovereignty in Africa impact on the desire for African unity. And so we've got to really get rid of this parochial identity as nation and embrace a continental identity of Africa. Well, to collaborate, you just have to agree to collaborate. We've begun to see it happen. With 46 countries now registered to the African peer review mechanism, this is historic. And we can do more. We've ratified the AFCFTA. So the movement is there. It's just to harness it and give it the necessary drive to have larger impact. So Africans must agree to work together. Even, on the matter of the large number of illegal immigrants in our country, we should be talking to those sending about how we can manage this movement better and collaboratively, so that it doesn't become an impediment for South Africa, but is regarded as being of value because it is efficient, managed appropriately, and we all know what the basis of this is. Because this unmanaged illegal migration is a recipe for huge problems. The idea of sovereignty, over to you.
Professor, I could say any better than you have already, Madam Minister. So, yeah, I think in today's world, the future of sovereignty has been attacked, has been eroded. Some people think it's a good idea, and it's going to be a while before we kind of write down, because at one level, there are people that are eroding national sovereignty for the various purposes. But at the same time, as we try and achieve greater unity at regional and continental levels, with a bit of that sovereignty remaining.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Dr. and Prof with the contribution. And now I'm handing over back to the chair. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for Minister. Minister, thank you for answering all those questions. And Mr. Pandor, thank you very much for allowing her to answer all the questions. At that moment that happened there, you saw that moment. I was like, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in those people's house. It looks like they have very interesting conversations. I'm now going to hand over to the Deputy Chairperson and Executive Director of MISTRA, Joel Nechentenze. I'm not going to like with the others. I'm not going to read your whole bio, except for this guy works very hard. And he was instrumental in MISTRA coming to life. And just for that, I think we must give him a loud applause.
Thank you, Dr. Van Eck. I nearly said Minister. Dr. Pando. I was told by our team that I should not try to respond to any questions because I've got a specific task for this evening, which is to thank all participants in this Mapungubwe annual lecture, to thank the program director, Dr. Claudel van Eck, as she has said, a member of our board of governors, for her deft handling of today's engagement. I can reveal that she's one of the sticklers for governance on our board. And today she has shown us a multitude of other skills. There are many other members of the board and the council, both here and online, and would want to acknowledge them also. Our partner and host, the University of Johannesburg, has once more gone beyond the call of duty to make this event a success. And we express our appreciation to Professor Refilwe Paswana Mafuya for your presence and through you to the VC and other leaders of UJ. I think we would all agree that there could not have been a better presenter for this theme this year. Dr. Naledi Pando's credentials on the theory and praxis of international relations are legend, and her integrity, in my view, is unassailable. Critically, we had the privilege of enjoying her frankness, making good trouble. She's not South Africa's ambassador to the US, nor does she harbor any ambition, I suppose, to become one. And so there were no holy cows. And we have learned from your input, Dr. Pando, that the world is indeed changing under our feet, shifting. Many across the globe had hoped that humanity had learned from history and that the many rules and institutions meant to improve the human condition and prevent tragedies had become firmly entrenched in the global commons. But as we know, and as you said, violent conflicts, genocide, trade wars, and the assertion of might as right all play out in bold and distressing relief. You teach us that there are underlying ideological, political, and economic interests behind what seems to be very irrational. And as the global preeminence of a hyperpower slips, there seems to be a wild lashing out, a desperate attempt to freeze the status quo. And I think I would take it from your presentation, Dr. Pando, that we may need to dial down on the obsession with one individual in the White House, because he's a product of a historical moment, a choice of the American people, and an instrument of the military-industrial intelligence complex. But we are left to wonder, as you were saying, where are the left parties and their erstwhile discourse on the political economy? Where are the developing countries and their historical agency for human solidarity? Where is Africa and its collective vision for social progress? Across the world, it seems many have come to the conclusion that to cringe, to fawn, and to flatter will pacify the situation, hoping that the hindmost behind us will be gobbled. Unipolarity may indeed be on the wane, but as you have argued, multipolarity is yet to emerge. And as Gramsci warned, in this interregnum of an old that is dying and a new that is not yet born, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Hopefully, as you have argued, a new global progressive agenda will emerge with Africa amongst the forces at its vanguard. Now, Dr. Pando, you would have noticed from the spirited and keen engagement from the audience here and on the virtual platform, whom we thank profoundly, that these issues will continue to engage our mind well beyond today's not just lecture, but masterclass. We should also thank Professor Sifutu, the discussion facilitator, and as always, the organizers from the staff of the Mapungubwe Institute and UJ, as well as the PR agency 280 for their contribution to the success of the event. Now, Dr. Van Eck, I think, will advise us on the remaining order of proceedings. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much, Joel. Lots of wisdom in that head, I'm telling you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a matriarch in the eye of the storm. And to use Joel's words, giving us a masterclass today, encouraging us to strengthen our grip, the grip of our feet, use the weight of our collective, to be courageous and keep chipping at it. So let us take up the call and make good trouble. I'm going to do just that. Minister, just a small token of our appreciation. Don't worry, I'll come to you. Right. Once again, thank you everybody for coming today. Whether you were able to ask the question of the minister very directly, or just bring in the energy of your presence, we say thank you. But please keep the call to action in mind. Those of you who joined us online and those of you who participated, thank you very, very much. You can't come into the eye of the storm and have a masterclass without an audience who bring presence, who bring themselves into the room. And as we leave, I ask that you remember who you are. I'm going to ask, please, after this, if all the speakers can just stay behind and the members of the board of MISTRA, we're going to have a short photo opportunity. Minister, we cannot bypass that opportunity. I need to be in the photo so I can show and tell I was there on that particular day. I also want to just, before I release you, to remind you of the very important work that MISTRA is doing. MISTRA is a non-profit organization, and it really, really is very dependent on donations and support. What we were able to do today is really as a result of the support that we received, that we've been receiving in the partnerships. So if you're not already a supporter or a donator of in MISTRA, I please ask you to think about how you can help us to make our collective voice stronger and to create, to increase our collective weights. I'll leave those thoughts with you before I tell you there's food. So where you found the refreshments earlier, please, we invite you to join us for refreshments and don't just rush off. We don't want fruitless and wasteful expenditure. The university is under the PFMA, right? Yeah, no, please, you must help us eat the food. Otherwise, we're going to have a bit of a problem. With that, I thank you all. I ask you to please, when you leave, drive safely and take everything that we've got here, what we got here today, and take it out into the world with you. Thank you very much.
Anytime.